animals on Earth that have culture, by which I mean aspects of our lives that are not handed down through the DNA, but are the consequence of invention by us creatures and are handed down from generation to generation. But the difference in degree is so great between ourselves and between even our pretty distant ancestors and the kind of culture that you can find in songbirds that produce dialects in their songs, or chimpanzees that have certain practices of tool use, of how to get termites out of it's so great a difference in degree that it really represents a difference in kind. Nonetheless, culture tends to build upon itself. It's cumulative. And I'm imagining that given enough time, if we human beings hadn't emerged in the last, when do you start? When we split up with the chimpanzees of 6 or 7 million years ago, when we see the first signs of tool use among humans, well, that number is getting pushed back more and more. But certainly we get to the point 40,000 years ago when there are these magnificent paintings. Nothing like that had existed. If we hadn't shown up, I would bet that there would have emerged some other creature. We're talking about 3.5 billion years of life evolving before we get to the caves in France, and or even to something like chimpanzees and bonobos and humans and their common ancestor. 3.5 billion years. All this stuff takes a long time. But anyway, whether it was inevitable that there would emerge a creature that was as cultural as our distant ancestors, once we took that path, certain things become increasingly, well, I use the word inevitable in the title. I probably should have back off a little bit on that and just say predictable. We can see in the fossil record how culture builds upon culture. Our species made the strategic move, I won't say choice because choice, but things happened that are among our ancestors that turned increasingly toward culture as the means, by the strategy for survival, tool use. And you can see in the fossil record, we're talking pretty far back, in the last million years, the human hand evolved in ways that were conducive to the use of tools that you hold in your hand. It was already the case that we primates, grabbing vines and branches and such things. We even before we were using tools, we had hands and opposable thumbs and the likes. But as we became more and more dependent on using tools, our bodies changed over the course of however many generations you want to consider. How many 20-year generations are there in a million? You can do the math. But things changed because we were already investing in culture and culture built upon culture. And one of the ways of building upon culture was to shape our bodies to be more able to use culture. And that was true not only in our hands, but also in our entire vocal apparatus. I've Googled the question, how far back does language go? And I get answers that I frankly don't believe. I get answers in the vicinity of 50,000 years. I just don't believe that. I think that the fossil record, and I think I've read this too. I think the fossil record shows that from, say, Lucy's setup, the famous skeleton of a 3.2 million years ago that Leakey found in South Africa. Or was it the old Doven Gorge? My memory's failing in these details. But from the way she was set up to the way we're set up was a whole process that led to our having different setup with our tongue and our vocal cords that I think the evidence suggests that we were already making use of language. Very useful thing to have a language when you've got a species that's dealing with survival as a group that in which cooperation is a central thing. Important to be able to communicate with one another. You can be a lot more specific if you got language than if you just are grunting or pointing or whatever. So we have a vocal apparatus that enables us to continue to invest ever more fully into culture. And of course, above all, the human brain. The brain has grown steadily. I think our brain is 3 times the size of Lucy's or of a chimpanzee's, something like that. And in the course of the last hundreds of thousands of years, the human brain has increased in size. Because if you're depending on culture for your strategy to survive, there will be an advantage for those who have a greater capacity to make use of culture. And the brain is at the heart of all that. It's the brain that enables us to invent things, whether it be languages or tools or paintings, rituals, beliefs. So culture was building upon culture, even at the level of our bodies, for a very long time. Then 10 or 12,000 years ago, our species took what I call on my website, please go take a look at that, abetterhumanstory.org. I call it the fateful step. Fateful because it had so many unforeseen and unforeseeable ramifications, which is the step of extricating ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically by inventing a way of life. In other words, even when people were painting on caves, they were still living in hunting-gathering bands that were still basically continuous with the way our primate ancestors had lived. Small groups living in nomadic and having in size and structure that was basically continuous with the primate past. But because of these brains and our inventive, creative intelligence, that the path of culture was favoring our developing, we became the first species that had a level of creative intelligence that allowed us to break out of the niche in which we evolved biologically. by inventing our own way of life. So we got, whereas the hunter-gatherers were hunting and gathering, the animal, some of the animals that the hunters had hunted, the creative intelligence of our ancestors led to herding of those animals and bringing them under human control, bringing them out from the natural order and creating a herding way of life that had not been handed down through our DNA, but was invented by our creative intelligence. And the plants that people had gathered for eons, some of them at least, were conducive to being brought into a gardening, horticultural way of life, where some of those plants that had been gathered are now controlled by human beings in their own space. And this is an unprecedented step in the history of life, that something is being created not by natural selection, but by the cultural imagination of a species that's pretty smart. Well, that opened up all kinds of things. I mean, a hunter-gatherer way of life is circumscribed in what it can become. But when you start on the path of horticulture and herding, it leads inexorably, and I don't mean like overnight, but between the beginnings of this process 10 or 12,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago, you can see that in a half dozen places on this planet, there was an inexorable process, what looks to me like an inevitable process. And please go to betterhumanstory.org if you want to see why it was an inevitable, of emerging into agriculture, into societies of a magnitude previously unimaginable, into something very different, not contained in the natural order, but a new form of life called the civilized society that has been the fruit of cultural innovations. Now, at the core of my Better Human Story is that path inevitably unleashes a social evolutionary force that's a function of the nature of the system, which is that the interactions among these societies are not regulated by any life-serving order, which is not the way it is in the natural world. I mean, in the natural world, the way I put it is the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. But civilized societies break out of that order, and there are dynamics that emerge from that. But maybe I'll leave that dynamic aside and just say that, at least for the moment, that because we're cultural animals, and because culture means the creature is both inventive and capable of transmitting its inventions from generation to generation, there will be a cumulative development in the cultural realm. And the nature of that cumulative development, even without the destructive dynamic that we unwittingly unleash, will mean that we will become increasingly powerful. Our culture will become increasingly powerful over time. It'll become increasingly powerful in two respects that are germane to the issue of what I call this inevitability that we will eventually face the possibility that we might that a creature like us might end up destroying itself because of embarking on the path of civilization. But increasing as soon as we become civilized, there are really vast possibilities for how things might develop. And we will become more powerful in our relationship with nature, like the horticulture is more powerful than the hunting gathering. The herding is more powerful than the hunting gathering. And there, people, the agriculture was more powerful in terms of harnessing the ecological system to meet, to get people what they wanted. We would become more and more of a bigger bull in the biospheric China shop as we depart from that order of the lion, the zebra, and the grass. So they're destructive that emerge and is shown in the whole history of civilization. You can read a book called The Topsoil and Civilization. Just one aspect of it is that wherever agriculture arose in the Fertile Crescent, it didn't stay fertile for all that long because a new life form that wasn't shaped to fit into the natural order was going to operate in ways that were destructive to that natural order. And so the topsoil disappears. The herding of sheep spread the Sahara Desert because out of that natural order, the sheep were allowed to, they got rid of the predators that kept the grazing in check, and the desert spread. And we can see all kinds of this. And now in our time, we can see that the power of civilization in the biospheric China shop has reached the point where after the Industrial Revolution, we have wrought so much destabilization of the Earth's climate system that we've shown that we've become powerful enough that we might more or less destroy human civilization by virtue of our not fitting into the requirements that natural selection made sure that things had to work for the long haul, or they wouldn't get passed along. Gregory Bateson said, "No creature can win against its environment for long." And we've been winning against our environment, but as we get more and more bigger bull in the China shop, that idea of winning starts to look like a way of actually ending up losing. And maybe the whole system of life on Earth will lose with us because we have destabilized a vital system on the planet that life requires. I mean, the Earth and life have had emergencies that have been destructive before. When 66 million years ago, when the asteroid hit this planet, what do they say? 75 or 80% of the species were driven to extinction fairly quickly. Even in the water, I think. But anyway, it was a terrible. It took 1,000,000 to 3,000,000 years for life to recuperate. And then there have been the various other things which can destabilize life. I mean, I say a perpetual motion machine, but that's just got to do with what natural selection creates, which is limited in nature because life on Earth doesn't create order on everything. It's an order which exists in a cosmic system where there's no guarantee that an asteroid won't hit the planet, and there's no guarantee that there won't be ice ages that drive a lot of destruction in life. And the system of life on Earth didn't control how the tectonic plates moved, so that when how long ago was it? Less than 50 million years ago, I think. Uh, the North American plate and the South American plate uh, moved together and joined at the Isthmus of Panama, and created kind of a chaos between the two systems of life that had independently developed. So that you had marsupials in South America and placental mammals in North America, and all of a sudden they're thrown together. And the placentals basically mostly got the better of the deal. A lot of marsupials were driven into extinction. We got possums around where I live. They're marsupials. They made it. I don't know what they had going for in general. And we got placentals and like leopards in the Amazon. So, but those are all came from the forces at work that life did not control. That didn't come from the systems of life, but the civilization creating species, we are the first things to emerge that I'm aware of, to emerge in the system of life, which constitutes a threat to the survival of life on Earth, and more immediately a threat to ourselves through climate change. But also, and here we go back to what I do have on my website about the dynamic that emerges with civilization, inevitably, not because of the nature of the species, but only as a function of stepping out of the system in which the interactions among the elements have been shaped by natural selection, so that there's synergy that leads to a long-term viability. We left that order and we plunged ourselves unwittingly into a kind of anarchy, because there was no system to control how the various elements among these new life forms, civilized societies, would interact with each other. And so essentially the anarchy that is inevitable with the rise of civilization, regardless of the nature of the species, meant that there would be a war of all against all. And the war of all against all means that only those cultural options that are conducive to surviving in such a war-ridden system would survive and spread, and all the other cultural options would disappear. So we've got a problem of war that is inherent in the rise of civilization for any civilization creating species, us here on Earth and any other species on any other planet. And there are billions of them. And I don't think we're the only ones, but we don't know. But I expect that there are lots of other planets. And in every case that they will plunge into this anarchy, and this anarchy says that the system is going to be plagued with the problem of war. There's just going to be an inherent instability and insecurity. And so when people are inventing their own way of life out of this creative intelligence, not only are they trying to find ways of harnessing the living systems to feed themselves, like with agriculture and the Industrial Revolution, and to meet their other needs, but the need to survive in a system which is plagued by the problem of the war of all against all will put people's ingenuity to work on a chronic basis to invent ever better weapons to survive in that problem of war of all against all. And so the people who had stone tools, and eventually you get the beginnings of bronze, and then the people who wielded the swords made of bronze find themselves confronting people who are wielding swords made of iron. And either they learn to imitate somebody who's got something better, the ways of power spreading through the system, either by imitation of, if we want to survive against the people with the iron swords, we got to be able to make iron, or the guys with the iron swords will conquer the people with the bronze swords over all these generations of thousands of years, and selection for ever new technologies, catapults and gunpowder, and then comes the Industrial Revolution, and the industrializing societies are able to subordinate the rest of the planet. And the Japanese look at what's happening in China, and they say it's either industrialize or be gobbled up by these European imperialists, and they industrialize, and eventually they beat the Russians in 1905, and ever greater power emerging with this cumulative culture. Culture is cumulative, and it's cumulative in all kinds of dimensions, so that, you know, the linguists tell us that, well, we shouldn't dismiss the languages of more primitive societies, and I don't use primitive as a pejorative, but a lot of people have. They have complex languages, but you know, I can't believe that if you look at what the English language has become, if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, the multi-volume thing that's condensed into 2 volumes that you need a microscope to read, you know, it's hard for me to imagine that any horticultural society had anything like so complex and abundant a set of things in this cumulative thing that we've developed. I mean, we've got words that are derived from Latin and from Hebrew and from Greek. This is such a richness because we're able to transmit things, and things get ever bigger, not just the Oxford Dictionary. You know, the average young person in America today probably knows a lot, but I'm not sure they know more than the average member of hunting-gathering societies who had to learn about a lot of ways of reading the signs of nature and finding the things that they needed to for survival and protecting themselves that they needed. But even if individuals don't have more culture accumulated in their minds, if you look at the complexity of a modern society like the United States, all the millions of businesses and all the specialties, and if you think of all the stuff that anybody knows as a cumulative thing, it's enormous. And so it gets bigger and bigger and more powerful, both in all kinds of areas, including the ability to meet human needs, like, you know, like a microwave oven and a dishwasher, and the means to make a video like this. But also specifically in the areas where, from the outset, civilization showed itself to be destructive, like in upsetting the natural order and spreading deserts and driving species into extinction. And in the realm of warfare, where the possibility of our civilization ending in a nuclear holocaust is something that my generation grew up with. I was born in 1946. I was probably conceived about the time that the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and then the next one on Nagasaki. You know, I'm the generation that you know, had drills about duck and cover and out in the hallways by the lockers, holding our heads down so we wouldn't, you know, get hit by flying glass. We came close in 1962. I don't know exactly how close, but the people who studied that crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, say that, you know, the possibility that human civilization might have immolated itself and brought much of the planet down with us was genuine in 1962 if the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union hadn't found a way to defuse that crisis. And now we're facing a couple of other. It's clear we have not escaped from the possibility of self-destruction through nuclear holocaust. But it is eventually, that was, I think, pretty inevitable to happen. I don't know if it's accurate to say that once you get as cultural as we were, say, 500,000 years ago, you're bound to get as cultural as we were, say, 20,000 years ago. And I don't know if it was inevitable that if we were as cultural as we were 20,000 years ago, it was essentially inevitable that at some point we would cross the threshold into inventing this new life form. But I think it is true that once you start on that pit trail, the power of the civilization is going to have a long-term trend of becoming ever, ever, ever greater. It will sometimes break down. I mean, the fall of the Roman Empire. I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but I think it can be said that there was no power on earth as great as the Roman Empire at its peak. And I don't know how China at its peak or when that peak exactly would have been said. But in any event, in the European part of the world, and beyond Europe to the whole Mediterranean and the areas that are adjacent to it, the fall of the Roman Empire led to, as they call it, the Dark Ages and then the Middle Ages. And so you could say, there was a fall in the power of civilization for a while. But eventually, out of the disorder that constituted, the feudal period where the gangsters set up their castles and on hills and held the serfs under their domination. The spirit of the gangster once again showing how anarchy produces a world ordered by some pretty ugly stuff. But it was not as powerful as the Roman Empire. But eventually, in that part of the world, there emerges, certainly by the age of exploration with the Spanish and the Portuguese and the English and the French extending their power around the planet. And certainly by the time the English launched the Industrial Revolution and it spreads to the other countries in Europe and to the United States and Germany, and certainly by that point, the onward and upward power of civilization had increased, and the power of the weapons that we had increased, and the power of the economic system engaging with the planet increased. And I think it is inevitable, therefore, that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that embarks upon civilization will steadily increase its power, and eventually, it took us 10,000 years, but eventually will reach a threshold of power, even in terms of its weapons or in terms of its ecological impact, where it could destroy itself. We actually, my generation, in living memory, is the first glimpses that human beings have had that we are capable of destroying ourselves. It was World War II that generated the Manhattan Project that successfully harnessed the power of the atom and created the possibility of a nuclear holocaust as the arms race unfolded during the Cold War. So we saw that. Nobody else had ever seen that actual possibility. And it is more recently, in terms of my awareness of it, it was the the late 60s and into the 70s that it became really evident that the power of this industrial and post-industrial, whatever, civilization of ours had the capacity to inflict such catastrophic damage on the biosphere that we might bring the whole temple down upon ourselves, like Samson in the Bible. So this is a new phenomenon, but it was eventually going to happen. I mean, if the civilization hadn't created it now, ever growing eventually crosses that threshold, and that's why I say it is the cumulative nature of culture, which maybe makes civilization eventually inevitable. I could be wrong about that. Maybe something like hunting gathering societies under some circumstances would go on indefinitely. I don't think so, but could be. But once you embark upon that, it seems to me that if you've got the creative intelligence to invent things, you've got the capacity to transmit culture in all of its forms, in terms of weapons and in terms of concepts like paradox and forgiveness and all the stuff in the Oxford English Dictionary. Once you've got all that going, I don't see what stops it from eventually reaching the point where the creature has a civilization so powerful that if it doesn't manage the forces that it commands or unleashes, fails to command, well enough, soon enough, it can destroy itself. This is the challenge that we now face. This challenge that within living memory has become visible, and it was there in the germ of what we have become. Eventually, we would face this, and I think any species that crosses that threshold, any species that has the creative intelligence to cross that threshold, is going to be challenged to apply that creative intelligence to bring those forces under control and to create an international order that's not a war of all against all, where some fascist dictator in Russia can put the whole planet into a dangerous situation, and where the industrial civilization doesn't generate a fossil fuel industry that can paralyze the civilization from responding to an ever more visible challenge to its viability for the long haul. In other words, crossing that threshold into civilization will inevitably compel that creature eventually to order its civilization well enough and soon enough for it to be able to survive for the long haul, rather than to destroy itself, either through the weapons it has created or through its ecological recklessness. That is the challenge that we as a civilization face. And I encourage you to take a look at some of the things I've had to say about why that challenge was inevitable and what it's going to take for us to be able to meet that challenge. There's no more important thing for us to do than to order our civilization well enough. Everything that we hold sacred is now at stake. And it is, as far as I can tell, something of a toss-up whether we're going to meet that challenge or whether the human story is going to culminate in some self-inflicted catastrophe. Thank you.